Yo, what's up, real life? It's good to be back with you. We're going to be kicking off a series tonight called What to Do When You Don't Know What to Do. This is going to be simply looking at the life of Joseph, looking at the obstacles, the really hard, difficult situations that he found himself in throughout his life and how he handled those situations. Tonight, we're going to talk about when you don't know what to do, be aware of those closest to you. I don't know if you're anything like me, but when I'm at home, I act a little differently than when I do in public. Not that I change as a person, but I'm a little more weird when I'm at home than I would be at real life at church, out in the community. I'll give you one example. I do this really weird thing with our kids. I make up songs about everything. Like, I just make up ridiculous songs all the time with my kids. I rap. I'll sing pop songs. I'll go slow. I'll go fast. I can make up a song with my kids about anything. I'll just make it up on the spot. Now, listen, I would never do that at real life. I'm a little more weird, I promise you, when I'm at home. Another thing I've noticed that maybe you can relate to is sometimes I'm a little more difficult when I'm at home. That maybe I'm a little harder on the people I'm closest to at my house than I am when I'm out with some other people. When maybe I'm at church or I'm hanging out with my friends, then I'm at the coffee shop. I'm a little more difficult when I'm with those people who I'm closest to. And if you think about it, you may be the exact same way. You would never leave your dirty clothes all over your friend's house, but you don't think twice about it when you're at home. You wouldn't talk to your coach a certain way, but maybe you talk to your parents like that. Maybe you would never treat your friends a certain way like you would a sibling. Oftentimes, we're harder, we're more difficult when we find ourselves around those people who we're closest to. And why is that? And I think it's partially because when I'm at home, I think about my house as that's my world and everybody else is living in it, right? It's like that's my spot. That's my home and everybody else is just living in it. And so when I react to something that somebody does in my home, when I react to something that somebody close to me does, it comes from the question of how does this affect me? That when something happens, I respond only thinking about myself. And we see that this happens in the life of Joseph. And then we get to Genesis chapter 37, and we start to see some of this family tension show up. In verse 6, it says this, Genesis chapter 37, verse 6. He, Joseph, said to them, being his brothers, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to it." Essentially, Joseph is saying, hey, I'm going to become this big, powerful person, and one day you're going to bow down to me. And so, as you can imagine, his brothers took this really well. And in Genesis 37, verse 8, he says, his brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he said. See, they already had this reason where this tension, this really hate towards him because of the favoritism that Jacob was showing him. Then he turned around and said, hey, you're going to worship and bow down to me. Joseph would then get another dream about the moon and the stars and the sun, and the moon and the stars would bow down to him. And so this one not only included his brothers, but it included his dad, it included his family, his parents, that they would all bow down and worship him one day. Can you imagine the tension that was happening in this house? One dad, 4 moms, 12 kids, and one of them, who happens to be his dad's favorite, is talking about how he's going to worship and rule, or he's going to rule and over his siblings and his parents, and they're going to worship and bow down to him one day. See, when Joseph got that dream, he was only looking at it through the lens of how does this affect me? And because of that, he acted in a really harsh way to those people around him rather than keeping it to himself, not trying to put himself in front of his brothers and also his parents. And then we see that the brothers in the family, the brothers especially, were acting in the same fashion, right? They only looked at the unfairness and the cruelty behind what he was saying. They were already bitter about the favoritism, and then he would have the audacity to say something like that to them. They were only looking through the question of, how does this affect me? And so we can look at the life of Joseph and his family. It'll show us how to operate in a family when it's complicated. Joseph also shows us how to pay attention to how our actions are affecting the people who we're closest to, and also to remind us to not just leave tension unresolved, that when something's going on, that we have to address it. And so what do? We pay attention to those that we're closest to. We examine our actions when it comes to the people that are closest to us. Are we only reacting from a place of selfishness? How does this affect me? Or are we really concerned about those around us? Paul would give us some advice in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 8. He says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even to death on a cross." See, Paul's telling us, let's look to the example of Jesus Christ, who didn't look, he was God, yet he didn't take advantage of that, but he actually lowered himself, taking the likeness of a human to be able to love and to serve other people. He certainly did not look up in heaven and say, how does this affect me? Because he would have seen that it was going to take him to the cross, that it was going to take him to a brutal death. But rather, he said, how does this affect the others around me? How is this going to affect people for all of eternity? How am I going to be able to open up redemption and relationship with God the Father for all of eternity? And by doing so, he came to earth and he took our place on the cross. And that's the advice we have to follow today, the example of Jesus. That when we don't know what to do, when we're in a tough situation, maybe you find yourself in a tough family position right now. I know a lot of you may have a really hard family life right now. That you're in a tough situation that you wouldn't even consider what you go to at home. What do you do when you don't know what to do in that situation? You look around those people who are closest to you and you say, how can I have an impact on their lives? How can I put them before me? And when we begin to put others in front of us, it begins to widen our perspective on life. And we start to figure out direction. We start to get guidance in our lives on what we're supposed to do. When we started, we had no idea where it would go. And so today, this week, look for a way that you can serve the people closest to you, those people in your home, and watch what God can do through it. Love you guys. We'll be back next week with another lesson from Joseph.